Well, there's the football and the football and the reaction to the football and the football and the goals and the radio commentary and the hope and the exhilaration and the football. So we talk about that, even though I don't know if Fraser's all that keen. We talk also about the lessons you might learn from Denmark, which is being heralded by Labour as the template for their new crackdown, their tough crackdown on refugees and asylum seekers. Strangely enough, Copenhagen has just lost the Social Democrat mayor that it's held for 100 years, mostly over the pact with the far right. So beware what you wish for, methinks. We talk also about the new Good Morning Scotland. I can't remember the name of it, but you know what I mean. Is it all that different, and what could it be doing more? We look at the COVID inquiry verdicts and the tragedy, really, of the establishment telling the Scottish Government that their big mistake was not deviating completely from what the British government was doing. All of that's coming up. Those are the headlines. Now for the podcast.
Well, hi folks, and welcome to this week's Leslie Riddoch podcast. After the big teaser of will we record on Tuesday, will we record on Wednesday, could it be McCaskey's mince, or was it the potatoes he likes, we actually ended up recording on Blinking Monday, completely unexpectedly, but life gets in the way.
It does. Yeah, friends and kind of children and all sorts of stuff. So we will take in the budget when it's happened, which is a kind of novel idea next week, although I'm sure we will speculate a bit today. But Indeed. Still, the football!
Whoa!
And you just don't give a toss, do you?
I mean, I'm worse than Pat with the Eurovision Song Contest or Song for Europe or whatever it's called nowadays. I have seen it now, though. I was at a whiskey tasting in the SNP Club in Edinburgh on Friday there, and after the end of that, somebody put the highlights up on YouTube on the big telly. So it struck me, it was like football that other people have was really my sort of hot take on it. Like those goals were the kind of gallus professional footballing that other countries that are slicker and cooler than us do. It was quite something to behold.
It was. And I mean, I feel ashamed because I didn't actually have the courage to watch it. And it was just when I was watching the end of the news at 10 that the newsreader just sort of leaned in a little bit to the camera and said, by the way, very well done, Scotland. And I thought, what the? And ended up looking at it, and then was up till 2 o'clock in the morning looking at all the social media. People can condemn social media, but by gum, when you want to get a sense of where everyone's at, and when you want to see the ingenuity and the reruns and the thing that got me in the end most, maybe it's because I spent so much of my life working in radio, was the radio commentary. I mean, I don't know if did I not send that to you? I've sent it to everybody.
Yeah, the goal.
Because the guys just end up, as you can hear, my voice hasn't really recovered yet. It's a bit of lurgy, bit of shouting, but I'm not even going to try the sort of just the endless yelling and the incoherent why. It's so beautiful to hear that release, and it makes you realise how much it's been such a dogged, long, difficult life in many respects. The last time I feel that euphoric was, at various occasions during 2014, but obviously not after the referendum itself. And it sort of puts you back in that mind, it was just so class, so amazing, so apparently effortlessly class. It's almost like, where did that seventh gear come from? And also that, things, it was the little things actually as well, because when Scott McTominay did that unbelievable, overhead kick.
One. Yeah.
I mean, I know there's an awful lot of people that are, expert in football who will say, oh, I've seen ones before that are whatever. It was still astonishing that early in the game. And then Scott McTominay ran to the stadium. And it was funny because, when you're watching it, all his colleagues are trying to kind of, grab him and have a wah kind of moment with him. And he's just going, get out the road. He's I'm running to the stadium, and he's totally steely-faced. And then you see this question really visibly playing on his lips, which, others have confirmed, where's my mum? And you think, God love him. And he finally locates her somewhere up in the sort of salutes her. And geez, there's an awful lot of people who are dubious about football, and a lot of women. Oh dear, here we go. She talked for a while.
as you know, I'm not a football person, but, being able to sort of collectively enjoy something like that is just so uplifting, as you said in your column. I didn't know they were playing, I have to say, although I think you had mentioned it in the podcast. So just getting this sort of bombardment of WhatsApp messages after it went through, and kind of living vicariously through those until I saw the goals on Friday was really quite something. And I think it just gives everybody a boost, and I hope we're not going to get the next inevitable press story is kind of Scotland in a high, ready to go on to a low once we actually have the contact of the World Cup itself. But it's just so great and so joyous, and just everybody just going completely local bananas at the sight of these guys, just putting us over the line. And I think, as you said in your column, and as I was thinking, it was kind of an actual draw, an actual win, a really kind of convincing, sexy, big style, bang, bang, bang. We've won this game, as opposed to, we drew with somebody else, and if they go out, and if they only get 2 goal point difference between this and this, and we'll be able to go through by default kind of thing, where people are kind of gaming and calculating on their fingers as to what's the permutations that might possibly see us through. This was a really convincing and bold take, and a kind of swish over the line that really made it feel all the more special.
Yes, I mean, I was actually, knowing that you probably wouldn't exactly be sort of reveling in the splendour the same way, I was almost tempted to go round and see Pat at 2:00 in the morning, actually.
Sure,
you'd be happy to hear. I had to sort of restrain myself. And then, remember, I said to you, maybe I should go round and just record a wee bit with him so that he could go, yes, in a sort of, intellectual and analytical way about the whole thing. But I guess the thing is, we need hope. I mean, that's what this is all about, is when you feel hope, because you suddenly realise you've got a team. And okay, it's a team. It's not us. It's a team. But in the same way as you go with a team, whether you like it or not. You fall when they fall, you falter when they falter. And then occasionally you soar, because they excel. And so that sort of sense of connection that you almost didn't even know you had suddenly kind of hits. You realise everybody's kind of feeling the same way. And you have hope. You have hope. We've finally got this over the line. I mean, if nothing else proved it, look at the face of Steve Clark. That guy hasn't cracked a smile, looks like forever. And I mean, I'm struggling to think which are my favourite pictures of things, but one definitely is that moment where he's hugging and being hugged by all the team, and he's got his head back and he's laughing like a madman. And it's just the amount of pressure on that guy and everything. It's sort of, so okay, I know we've got the next thing of going to the World Cup and, more serious teams and expectation, yada, yada, and possible loss. But you can't take it away that we've qualified.
Yeah.
And it says something about Scotland that just qualifying is a big deal for us. But it is.
But I mean, it is a big deal. I think a lot of coverage this morning on the BBC Breakfast Scotland, or whatever it's called now, about the angriness of the league rugby coach, and have this kind of expectation that we should be able to beat big teams. But Scotland is in, and Scotland, more than any country in the world, is very good at just going and enjoying these sporting events without having this kind of expectation that you're going to necessarily go through and make it all the way to the end. It's the kind of taking part that's the fun of it. But Scotland are in, not just kind of by hook or by crook, or by default, just by kind of
chancy way. They're
there for real,
on their own merit. But I mean, absolutely, all of that is true. They're that we've definitely proved that we're the best fans in the world, and probably the world's best losers. You know what I mean? So that's fine, and that people are kind of probably prepared to settle for that. But I mean, this is what hope is about. And then you can't, of course, if you're someone who supports independence, it melds it all in my mind. And I quite appreciate there's half the population for whom this will not occur. yet. But, when you begin to realize that things that, the limitations that you thought there were, what you'd settled for, what seemed kind of good enough, and then suddenly that's not, you've reached a new benchmark of what's possible. You get your chins up. You're looking across at countries like Denmark, and in the same, you're in the same breath as these guys in some respects. And actually, when I know this is a dangerous thing, because in the end, in the column I wrote, I did actually say it's not a good idea for yesers to kind of claim any of this. It's something, not claiming it, badging it, or using it. I mean,
I don't think the Daily Express headline writers had read to that paragraph.
No, they hadn't actually, but fine. But it's it's fine. Anybody will see it the way they see it, and for anybody who is feeling a bit down in the doldrums about the independence campaign or whatever it is, this powers our own mojo. So you don't need to lecture anyone else about it. So fair enough. But what it made me think was that there's so much depressing news around, and the stuff that was most depressing to me personally was the use of Denmark as, which of course I've made a film about and, find hugely impressive as a country, for the immigration crackdown that Labour announced last week, and particularly the really hard line approach to refugees becoming citizens of a country. And that was all pretty much modelled on the Danish stuff that's been brought in over the last 10 years. And I was kind of just Googling around about that to see how that's all going. And interestingly, the very same day that happened, Tuesday, the voters were in the polls in Denmark for their mayoral elections for their municipalities. And Copenhagen, the ruling Social Democrat Party, which is the equivalent of Labour, these are the guys that, did what Labour are doing here, which is the unthinkable, essentially. The Social Democrats lost Copenhagen for the first time in a century. Now, there's a lot of analysts, there's one that I quoted here from Politico, saying it wasn't just Copenhagen. There was 3 or 4 other major cities that the Social Democrats lost. But that person was saying voters in major Danish cities appear to be souring on Mette Frederiksen's tough stance on migration and her willingness to ally with economically liberal parties, well, liberal in that sense. So if you then start looking around the place, there's actually quite a lot of coverage of just exactly how dangerous seeing the Danish model as being appeasing the right might be. There's an excellent piece, I'll put the link up in The Guardian, from a guy, Cas Muda, who's actually Dutch, but he's an expert on the far right. And he's saying the big mistake everybody has made is looking at what's been happening in Denmark and across Europe and learning the wrong lesson. The lesson that Labour is learning here, which he thinks is totally wrong, is copying the far right. Because he says it not only fails to turn on far-right voters, it turns off progressive ones. And I mean, that's so obvious. But he's analysed all of this and saying research conclusively shows now that across Europe, the voters of Social Democrat parties have moved to centre-right and Green parties, leaving the old Labour movement chasing this mythical left-behind vote while trying to sort of appease the far right. And there's just one other wee bit on this. The cities are a key thing, and it minded me of what's happened in New York City with Soran Mamdani, where someone, it's not even a question of a Democrat winning. Mamdani's way to the left of the Democrats. I mean, Bernie Sanders was up with him. That's his kind of guys. The big cities have always been, I mean, London, you spent time in London. I can remember Boris Johnson winning the election and almost having to duck the eggs as he was trying to get in his car outside his house, because London itself is a very progressive city, but definitely so is Copenhagen, where all this weeding out, the ghetto laws that have been enacted have appalled people. And so what he's finally saying is, you can even look at countries like Austria, where the second city in Austria, Graz, has actually elected communists. So he's just pointing out that social democratic parties have a big problem, which is they have some of the oldest electorates. The people who are supporting the old parties, this old centre, Social Democrats, Labour, he's saying are literally dying out. And their left competitors are particularly popular amongst young voters, including many with a minority background, with whom younger people feel more common cause. Now, of course, in the past, everyone's going, yeah, fine. The thing is, young people don't actually turn out and vote in the end. Well, yeah, the recent, the examples of what's happening, New York, Copenhagen, maybe Graz, is that when you finally get somebody who seems to be talking your language and there's hope coming back full circle to this thing, which is also what motivated people in the independence referendum, that something truly dynamically transformational could happen, not just a little freaking tweak here and there, but that level of kind of energy, that changes the likelihood of young voters voting. So yeah, Denmark, be wary what you wish for, Labour.
Definitely. And, be wary, I think, of just copying and pasting policies from other people that don't necessarily sit completely in the UK sphere. We're going to be talking about the budget next week, but I mean, this again is a system of the Labour Party in the UK that seems to have really no core principles, that's been kind of bruised by its continuous U-turn to the first year of government, and unbelievable levels of kite flying and will we, won't we, maybe we will, we'll put the basic rate of income tax up, but we'll put national insurance down and we'll footer about and then ruining back. This is probably the most disastrous budget, I think, and certainly that I can remember the process of ever having occurred. And Alex Massey was reminding everybody of George Osborne's pasty tax, disastrous budgets of years gone by, in a piece earlier last week. But, this is a very odd process. Who knows what's actually going to come out on Wednesday, and we'll wait and see. But what we can see is that the Labour Party, particularly the government, have taken a huge amount of political pain without actually having done anything. It's the same with the winter fuel and the changes to all the other policies, the welfare policy and things like that they've had. Everything that's gone out is just looking totally chaotic. But we've still got this joyous football that we can roll back on. And
no, let's not stop gubbing the Labour on the budget yet. I think I've stopped cotton. I'm not even going to say that.
Don't tempt fate on that one.
Well, there's also, there's an awful lot of kind of speculation that Rachel Reeves might bring in a mansion tax. Have you seen this one?
Yes, indeed.
Which is, this would be instructing the Treasury to use the council tax as the basis for a new property tax. What? To hit the wealthiest homes by revaluing them at high tax bands F, G and H. It seems like that's been watered down quite a lot, but it would be quite a big tax hike, except people will be given until they sell their house or die before they actually end up paying it.
Yes.
I mean, would that do anything? Would that do much?
I mean, if it's deferred taxation like that, then it's not going to actually get you out of any particular fiscal gap that you've got in your present budget. And if you don't have to do it until you sell, there's been a lot of speculation as to what age you can actually start deferring your tax payment. And will people actually just hang on and hope that the UK changes course at some future point and you get a kind of cuddlier Reform or Conservative party in power that's got more pals with mansions, and the whole thing gets reversed. So it kind of goes on a kind of never tick book, and then at the time when you think you might actually have to start paying it, a more right-wing government comes in and just does a whole load of forgiveness. So again, this didn't seem like a particularly strident policy. It was kind of, again, more sort of slight kite flying and rhetoric. We'll make maybe a kind of core Labour vote feel that we're finally dealing with the big boys in their mansions that are not paying their fair share, but actually maybe they're not going to pay it at all.
Yeah, and then the Telegraph, not that I'm, a reader, but nonetheless, they've got Mel Stride from the Tories, who has totted up the numbers on the welfare spending that's expected. So this is the Tories. I mean, God, they are shameless people, right? But they are shameless. And they're getting less and less worried about the charge of hypocrisy as time goes on. And that's the other problem. I mean, God, there's so many problems with Labour being this crap. But one of them is that they start to make the Tories look good, and it's kind of like the big black obstacle in your brain of the time that Labour have spent screwing stuff up sort of obscures from your mind's view, almost, but it doesn't. But, it just dulls down the memory of just how bad they were. But still, he's out talking about welfare. This is obviously going to be their big thing. They reckon that there's extra welfare spending of 15 billion, and they're getting to that by the scrapping the 2-child benefit cap, which when she does it will be such an anticlimax. I mean, I doubt she'll even get brownie points for that. Yeah. It's the same way I already think it's 2026. I've just factored it in, I'm actually signing everything with the wrong date on it. Could be, other problems, but still, we've got that already. And if you spend that long gumming a problem, this is what happens is that when you look like happy days, we've done this. We've not only got that you took freaking forever on it, that you had to have a revolt from your own guys, and that the Scottish Parliament has passed legislation so that if you bottle it again, we who have to have a balanced budget have actually got it factored in for April. Yeah. So, how groovy does that look? I wouldn't have thought a lot. And yet, this is what the Tories will come from the other direction and say, unsustainable welfare bill, and you're just chucking everything in. Never mind that they're the same guys who'll be doing the old crocodile tears about the winter fuel payments and everything, which is more. But that's what they do, and that's what they will do, I'm sure.
And more pressure on Keir Starmer again as Clive Lewis had threatened that he might go and create a by-election to let Andy Burnham in.
Oh, yeah.
Over the weekend there, when he was asked, do you know what? If I'm going to sit here and say country before party, party before personal ambition, then yes, I have to say yes, don't I? I might very well let Andy come and have a go.
I mean, it would be in a funny way. I don't know if you know Clive Lewis particularly, but I mean, he seems to me to be one of the good guys.
Exactly. I think it'd be a kind of loss to Parliament, and I don't think the timing would work, to be quite honest.
And is he not down somewhere in Norwich or something?
Yeah.
I know they both start googling. Right, okay. But
anyway, but what I would say is that
he's knocked it back anyway, hasn't it?
But it. The electorate doesn't look very kindly on these things. I don't think, everybody's going to have to go out and vote in a by-election just to kind of titivate things for the Labour Party and change personnel. So I don't think that works particularly well. It also means that Andy Burnham has to go into a by-election campaign with the sort of express purpose of getting rid of the Labour Prime Minister, which might appeal to some sections of the electorate and not to others. And then, having done all that, you become a sort of Michael Heseltine character, where everybody knows that you're gunning for them, and he who wields the sword doesn't take the crown, type of thing. And you get put to the back benches by Ed Miliband when he tramples over the remaining bodies and comes out on top as the new UK Prime Minister.
My God, we've got the Grinch for this Christmas, folks. Here he is.
Well, this has been actively speculated that Ed's going to get it, and you think,
oh, you're joking.
You cannot be serious that this is going to, careful what you wish for, kids.
Wow.
Sack
but
of coal.
It just when I've looked at it, it is Norwich South, Clive Lewis. So I still think this was, because I think this was a factor for Angela Rayner, was sort of, people in the north, as laughingly Manchester is called, do resent people swanking off to somewhere that doesn't feel like it's the same demographic. And if you've got Andy Burnham being king of the north, I'm afraid, son, you need to stay there? Do you need to keep that power base? And I don't know if Clive's just got totally scunnered at, just at the end of his tether, but I can't see how that would work at all. He does need to do the hard miles, and, God knows what will help that party through. I mean, not that, in many ways, who knows? Because, probably what we're really looking for as people who support independence in Scotland, and for people who support transformational change in an archaic, broken state, is for not having a huge majority for Labour, but them relying on the smaller parties, and the smaller parties really being able to step right up and create a common platform even, because we so need a whole stack of stuff done. And it'll be difficult because you can see how the pushback comes when you don't carefully take people with you, even, a large majority, albeit I'm trying to think who I was listening to who was talking about Labour's victory and pointing out that only 19% of the electorate, the whole electorate, actually voted for Labour, which, if you want to look at it that way, means 81% didn't want to. So, how can you carry through the radical stuff that needs to happen? Well, especially if you lie, doesn't help, does it? To be saying one thing 1 minute and then just going directly in the opposite direction once elected. But you need to be preparing people for what you will really do. That comes back to the Zach Polanskis and people and blimmin' reform. I see today there's a big CBI conference that's got everybody rolling in trying to impress the great and the good, and the CBI trying to affect the budget at the last minute. Interestingly, Zia Yusuf, the reform guy, is speaking. It's the first time a reform guy has spoken to the CBI conference, and so is Kemi Badenoch. There's 4 hours between them, so people were speculating about how jolly the green room would be under those circumstances. But, one commentator said, well, next year we might well see Zach Polanski in there. So people have got to start thinking, the small parties have got to start thinking beyond their niche. Because if you're going to step up into government, you can't just play your niche. Obviously, you've got to play it enough to keep your voters happy, but you need to translate that into a big vision for how to change the country together. And that'll be a tall order.
Wow. Well, after that erudite and intelligent analysis, we can now hear from Shug from Auchinlechen, who's sent us a voice note on WhatsApp with his off-the-cuff take on this morning's news. Did you listen to BBC Breakfast this morning with their continuous entreaties? Please send us a voice note, please. This is your radio. We want your voice. I don't want to hear other people's voices. There's a perfectly good radio phone-in program afterwards where people get to give their appalling views on things.
Fraser, you're such a snob.
Which I switch off from. You just want a nice, clean take of the news without a whole load of schmaltz. But they were getting increasingly desperate with that. Now, if you just take your phone out, yes, now you press WhatsApp and you see the little microphone, could you record that?
Yeah. It's, well, I've got to say that the morning of the of the football, the morning after Conor McLaughlin's morning's programme, it's the first time I've listened to it in a very long time, and it was actually very good, because when you've got a good subject, she knew her subject as well. She obviously comes from sort of football commentary royalty, so that was actually very entertaining when there's something lively and up there to talk about. But I could hear all the anxiety there, because having done not Good Morning Scotland, I don't think I did Good Morning Scotland, too early. And honestly, God love these guys. 6 o'clock on air is, 4 o'clock out your scratcher forever, right? And I'd also got to say, I do actually feel sorry for the way, Gary Robertson and Laura Maxwell have just been, your yesterday's news just airbrushed out. And even during the course of that programme, there's a couple of people saying, hope Gary's having a good lie-in. Does Laura Maxwell not exist? They're both, to court all the wrath of the Yes movement, but they were both good broadcasters. The system, and as per previous columns, the kind of editorial tilt of that programme is what I've got a beef with. And it just sounds to me like Good Morning Scotland with different names. Even the base of the jingle that you play, the sting that you play to kind of jump from item to item is the same.
Well, it's kind of slightly jazzed up, but it's kind of sort of a modern, refreshed
still
take
got
on do. And I thought, what is the point of this? I didn't think it'd not gained anything, and it just lost a whole load of ability. It didn't seem, it made no sense to me at all.
Yeah, and that the sort of pleading thing. I mean, I know that was true with when I was doing the kind of phone in. You know, you would get a situation where I've got to say the first people that would phone in were often mad and obsessive, and it's the same in a room. I mean, when you look at people, you know, ask for questions, some hands shoot up and they stay up for improbable lengths of time. You know, I can think of some guys who've had their hands up for kind of like half an hour. And I mean, I'll say that to an audience before I did any event. I would say to people, can I just say to you that the way my mind works is that when we're on air and ask if anyone's got a question, somebody puts their hand up and, you know, has that glazed look and sits with their hand bolt upright for 10 minutes. I've got you marked out as an obsessive right there. And the whole audience howled with laughter, you know, which got the obsessives to think a little bit about their strategy. And I said, really, what you're looking for here is response. So that when somebody says something from the panel or anything that you really agree or disagree with, respond. Because in that moment, you are the most connected. It all makes sense to the listener. It's not going on pet theory, 1 off into pet theory 3. And that's why very often when I was doing stuff, I would actually just go round with the microphone and nobody would put their hand up during the entire program because I would just watch their faces. And people who would never put their hands up, I have the same. School's a lot to answer for, but, you know, putting your hand up is bowel emptying. You know, it's just still
That's not like, I think I
nerve-wracking.
might be right. That is like, I know I am so right about this. Let me just get it.
So, you know, most people don't like putting their hand up, actually, to sort of, even if they're completely coherent. So, but nonetheless, you can see that someone will look at their neighbour and go, for fuck's sake, you know, when they hear something that they really disagree with. If you just stick a microphone in front of their mouth at that point, they just speak.
Yeah.
And then their neighbour speaks, and you can go through a whole audience without any hands going up at all. Now, just coming back to all of this desperate need, you know, because you've got to work out a way to make people want to speak to you. And you can't do it in a news programme.
No.
I mean, that's the programme I did was a kind of discursive sort of one. And you really did have to work at creating all sorts of hooks, essentially, for people to go, no, I really don't think that. But, you know, not sort of artificially, but arising from the conversation you're having. So I don't know why there's this terrible need to show that people want to interact with you. It's like Johnny Naymates, you know, who just needs to show that everybody's beeling to kind of get on the programme and speak to you. And that's a kind of commercial radio thing as well. Which,
I almost thought he was going to say Dinky Doo at one point, you know, kind of the Scotty McClue show, you know, come on, Chinas, let's get your views in.
Well, Scotty was a class act in his own different way as well, actually. I
very often listened to Scotty back in the day when he was broadcasting. I think you actually can still pick him up nightly, possibly on YouTube Live if you're that way inclined.
But still, the point for these guys is just, I don't know, they're just, they have got a head of news who I think has come from Bauer, the commercial sector. And that slightly is the worry because, I mean, that was one of the reasons I left, not because of Bauer or commercial, but because it's about the same perhaps as the general discussion we're having about Labour deciding that the far right looks sexy, so let's try and have some of their policies. The view was that we needed to just have more people on, whether they were saying anything particularly constructive on the programme I was doing or not. We just needed more turnover, more voices. Now, to be fair to the breakfast programme, the one thing that does seem different, which Alison Rowett's noted in a very quickly turned around piece in the Herald, is that they're doing far fewer stories at greater depth. So they're actually covering stuff for longer, which I've got to be fair is not a commercial radio way of looking at it. She said GMS had 8 stories by 7 a.m. That she's calling the RSB, and then I have to look back to what that is, Radio Scotland Breakfast, which she says in brackets, no one will ever call it.
I was just thinking that very same thing.
It's still GMS, it's just easier, you know. But anyway, had 4. So, you know, she was asking if the longer runtime really threw a lot more light in things, and just she wasn't too sure that they were. But anyway, they've got Paraskoutsaianis, who was Scotsman's political core. Very hard-working, straight-up guy, I thought. He then was an STV, Channel 4, and he's been appointed as their new Westminster correspondent. So that could get some beefier stuff from there. And Phil Goodlad's still there doing the sport. I did think it was very funny, actually, because Martin Geisler was trying to muscle in, talking about Hearts and whether or not, Hearts have finally come adrift because they lost a match. And Phil just muzzled him straight back off the park, actually, in a very kind of robust way. Anyway,
well, I thought
the bigger thing will be...
It was a very funny bit, actually, because even for me, they were trying to suggest bias with Phil, and obviously he doesn't do that because he's the official sports commentator, and he diffed him right back up.
He totally diffed him. But that's what you need, some big adult muscular stuff on there where you've got a real personality. And that's the thing about Phil. He can be barking, which is always a good sign, and firm and funny and curious and all those things. I mean, that's what you want in a really great broadcaster. So, it's there, but I guess the bigger problem will be, as with many things, have people made their minds up and just don't listen to Radio Scotland? I find if I'm tweeting or anything about the content of something that's happened, there's no response because it's almost like people aren't listening to have a view about it. If you do something about the Today programme where somebody's just said something that's totally maddening, you find there's a pretty major immediate reaction. So I guess, that you have to have a whole network that people feel a relationship to. One programme pulling itself a little bit, up is probably not quite enough.
No, and I suppose it seems at least to be taking the breakfast news programme on BBC Radio away from trying to be Scotland's answer to the Today programme to being more like the kind of sofa BBC breakfast pap that goes out on TV. And that can't be good for Scottish democracy. And I think in the analysis of Scottish news, although it remains to be seen, and it's certainly interesting if they're taking things in greater depth.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how it works, because it's also the case that you can't escape the sort of geography of the moment that you're broadcasting. So, it's fine to have a longer depth thing, but if it's broadcasting to people who are desperately trying to get the kids organised, get the piece in the box, get out the door, for those that are now still going out the door. But, if you're putting kids to school, all that kind of thing, sometimes a choppier thing is more useful because you get more bits in, and also there's always that problem with the longer sections in programs. If you hit on a subject that really wasn't of great interest to anybody, they just switched it straight off. So but there's all of that, the swings and roundabouts. I'll certainly be listening, but then I do listen anyway. It's part of my behaviour as to 8 a.m. Good Morning Scotland. I'm sorry, I'll just keep calling it that. And 7 o'clock, Channel 4 News, and what's in between?
Indeed. Speaking of all things Scotland, I meant to say when we were talking about the Saltires waving at Handham that obviously it's now counting down the days to St Andrew's Day on Sunday. And I spoke about the service at Athelstanford, the birthplace of Scotland's flag, which is at 1:30 until about 2:15, 2:20ish at Athelstanford. I think the church is now going to be completely chock-a-block for the service afterwards. So I hope people will come just for the pipe band and the flag ceremony and enjoy that. And then they can make a day of it and slope off to the National Museum of Flight or pop off to Haddington for a nice coffee and a cake. But it's shaping up to be an excellent day, and I'm now looking at 5-day weather forecasts trepidatiously, but according to the latest one, it's going to be dry-ish on Sunday, and I've got my fingers and toes crossed that it is, because it was absolutely belting down yesterday.
Yeah, but then it's apparently going to be a storter tomorrow. Anyway, you're probably at a stage where there's no point looking at the weather anyway. But, I mean, well done. But, I mean, I think that is Fraser sort of saying, stop.
Yes.
Or if you're coming, come later.
Well, come and enjoy it. 1:30 to 2:20. but don't be upset if you can't get into the church. And obviously, it's a kind of charity event rather than a yes rally. So we've got a muckle saltire, so no need for any other flags there other than possibly little hand flags, but definitely no personal saltires, banners, or yesers or anything like that.
Right. Gosh, are you going to sleep between now and then? Honestly, do you want someone to send you voice notes about?
Just when I posted that last week, I thought, I mean, our listeners are all very sensible, and yesers know exactly what they're up to. I thought, but if we've seen some curious use of the saltire of late, and I thought it would just be good if people just rock up and enjoy it, and leave us to deal with the flags rather than feeling the need to bring their own. Because we've got it covered. There is a muckle saltire. We've got a 6-yard saltire for up the flagpole, and the flag master's having kittens about whether this is going to be too heavy and pull the whole thing over, but I'm sure it will be just peachy.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I want it sunny but windy enough that a big flag will fly. So there we go.
So what else? COVID inquiry.
COVID, yes. I mean, this I thought was a bit muted. Obviously, we have had a few days of press coverage, but obviously not anything so incredibly juicy in it. And because Boris Johnson's moved on, Nicola Sturgeon's moved on, there's kind of less pressing political need to attack the principles that were involved. It was official confirmation, I suppose, if anything, that had, from what we already kind of anecdotally knew and understood about all different aspects about the way that the Scottish government ran under the previous but one.
Welcome to our...
Sorry. Oh no. Right, so that is what you get from Googling around when you think you've got the chance to do it. It is relevant to what you're saying, but continue.
So I'm just... It did have official confirmation. It was, I suppose, official confirmation of what we already anecdotally knew about the way that Nicola Sturgeon's government had operated, that it was an extremely tight sort of grouping of people, kind of 2 or 3 people with the cabinet endorsing ideas rather than discussing and being involved in the production of policy. That didn't seem to be a great revelation, but I think the more important thing, though, is what lessons are going to be learnt from this. Nicola Sturgeon was obviously still very strident in her view that she wanted to lead from the front and that the buck stopped with her, and therefore she wanted to be across the detail of all of these decisions, and certainly wasn't in the mood to kind of apologise or retread any of that decision making. It was obviously an unprecedented happening. We haven't had a huge pandemic like that since Spanish flu, possibly after the Second World War, and of course the kind of the SARS virus in the East. So, this coming to, such a global reach was certainly without precedent. But, it was a kind of curious, muted response, I felt.
But then I'm sort of, one of the findings seemed to be about Scots, Welsh, whatever, but the Scots and Nicola Sturgeon, there was criticism of the Scottish government for essentially not going its own way.
Yeah.
And you sort of think to yourself, well, that's kind of priceless, because at the time, all the pelters were being directed to Nicola Sturgeon, apparently just, doing performative, we're more on it than you are kind of stuff. Because I do clearly remember at the very start of it all, she had called for a ban on 500s in my head there somewhere, about gatherings of more than 500, because there was a rammy about the golf or some sort of sporting event that would fall foul of that. And I mean, she did get absolute pelters. It's funny that those little attempts to sort of be on it sooner, and she was I think at the beginning she was absolutely urging a lockdown faster, but from what they're saying, it had to be February. And to calculate, it's an extraordinary thing to think 23,000 people died for the want of some just adults in the charge of the UK government 2 weeks earlier, 3 weeks even, it had that massive an impact. But I kind of wonder what, on that front, what Nicola Sturgeon felt she could have done, because she looked like she was trying to deviate from the plan. And yet all the kind of big public health planning levers and everything are pretty much in the UK government's grasp. She could have gone, could you just have decided unilaterally to go when it really began to bother you and shut the border?
I mean, I remember this at the time, and certainly I remember actually just when it was the early days before the Alex Salmond trial, or way before that, when it was just kind of bubbling under, and Alex Salmond himself talking about the fact that the Scottish-English border had been closed in the 70s for like chicken flu in poultry, and that it was, quite probably within the competency of the Scottish government to close the border on health grounds. And there was a lot of talk, remember, about kind of English motorhome owners or second home owners thinking, I want to get out of London, I'll go to my pied-à-terre in the country in Scotland to get away from the kind of clusters of people, because I thought it was going to be safer. And there were a lot of calls at that point to close the border, and we didn't, in the opposite way that the Welsh did.
Yeah, but much later the Welsh did. That was it's amazing how you can't remember this precisely, but I think it was the second lockdown.
Yeah.
And actually, when I was in Wales, the number of people I spoke to who said that was a moment where they supported independence. Weirdly enough, because it was obviously a Labour First Minister that did it, but to show that you could actually be fairly muscular and that there was a serious border, even though the Welsh border is a lot more blooming complicated than our one, it was a thing. So I haven't listened as ever forensically to every discussion of this, but I do wonder, because there's another problem for the BBC or other commentators, although, to be fair, Scotland Tonight usually have a fairly, robustly neutral way of getting to the centre of things. But if you're to even ask that question, in hindsight, should you have shut the border? That sounds like a yes kind of, funnily enough, question. I mean, it shouldn't get into something that's as tragic as COVID, but the idea that that's a lever that you could use would be fiercely disputed by a unionist, I guess. And yet, there was the thing. All the antennae of the Scottish government were picking this up seriously earlier, and yet they couldn't act, discuss. But we'll never discuss it, because that question will not be asked.
No,
and then the other thing is the decision to move people without testing them properly into care homes.
Yeah.
And that was just bad. I mean, and I friends in the middle of all of that who saw it happening and just almost lost their faith in humanity over it. And I mean, I was listening to the tail end of another good radio program, which is the Sunday show radio bit that goes on after the telly bit. And there was a very good discussion about social care with Penny Taylor, and that's what I was trying to Google, I'm sorry, while you were speaking, because I caught it halfway through, and it seems she's done a series about social care. The level of seriousness of this problem is massive and enduring. From memory, the Scottish government has spent something like 7 million quid. The experts think it needs 250 million quid just to stand still, just to even vaguely work. And as long as you have a malfunctioning social care system, you don't have a health service that works, you have problems with people being drafted into care for one another. And as Penny put it really powerfully, you end up with someone who's living on their own. And that, for example, that would be me. If I coped, or if I had something that goes seriously wrong, unless I have got neighbours whose generosity exceeds their current pretty wild amounts, I'm into the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem, because unless we get this all sorted out, there's where the costs are rising. Because I'm an emergency then, I have to be kept in because I'm not safe to be put home on my own. And there's where we need all the care in the community stuff needs to work. and it needs to work because it's well paid, because there's people in the short term who can come in on visas, because it's given an utter priority within health spending, because we're independent, because we can move more levers than the pitiful few that we can with regards to income. And Richard Murphy, leaping wildly to one side, wrote a tremendous article in the National about all of this, about just the pitiful lack of control over anything that Scottish government's got, and how he would like to be seeing a call for the devolution of more taxes from the Scottish government. And I know people will think, well, what's the point? They're never going to do any of this. And yet, actually, sometimes when you meet people who say, but did you ask for that? You think, well, maybe it's not a bad political move to be saying, we want the following things and we would do the following things. But still, the social care side of things, I was trying to find the link to the programme that Penny apparently has done, but I'll find it properly after we've spoken.
It's such a multi-layered and complicated thing, and it's obviously so bound up with people's own personal experience of what happened and their loved ones and the loss that they felt. And obviously that's been reflected very much in the kind of coverage, certainly this morning, as things are starting to kind of peter out in terms of the interest of the report, reflecting really on the upset and the anguish that the COVID bereaved families feel. But one thing that we potentially can look at in this respect is that you now have a national level report which says that the Scottish government effectively should have taken more strident steps and should have acted more independently, and potentially should have closed the border. I mean, Joanna Cherry at the time was the shadow Home Secretary, or the Home Affairs spokesperson for the SNP, shadowing the Home Secretary. I remember lots of calls for the airports to be closed, if you remember, and that was all falling on deaf ears at the UK government level, and a feeling that the Scottish government was powerless to do anything in respect of our airports, because if you closed international travel, people wanting to come to Scotland could simply just fly to London and then come up in the train or get an internal flight from London to Edinburgh. But certainly, I remember very distinctly thinking, actually, all you really need to do is get Bear Scotland out with a couple of JCBs and knock off a bit of the central reservation at the border on the motorway, and just turn some of these what do you call it, camper vans around and tell them to sling the hook. So we would potentially see a divergence here. But the other flip side is that, if you've got a devolved sphere of influence, which you're supposed to be maintaining and working under, and when it's health, but you think that the UK government does, big beastie pandemic responses and health plans and they've got that covered, and you're just working in your silo, it's a bit of an ask then to say, actually, those guys don't know what they're talking about, and you're going to have to break this process that you thought was existing and working quite happily, and do something divergent. If we remember Alternative Sage and the Scottish government finally deciding to get its own health advisors around and start kind of ignoring what was coming out of the UK, this is a much more complicated and kind of knotty problem that goes to the heart of devolution in a way that we're probably not going to properly analyse.
Yeah, I mean, it struck me there was a lot to do with political courage in it. And I mean, this would have taken titanic amounts of political courage to for the small things that Nicola Sturgeon dared to do. She got total pelters. And of course, it was always claimed that she was just weaponising independence and obsessed with independence and flexing muscles and making London wrong. I mean, here we are in hindsight. They had made themselves hopelessly, horribly wrong. But, there's a moment where you've got to have a way to say that hard thing and to act in a kind of really tough way. And what's visible out of all of this is that even what unionists will think is the most, let's say, independence-obsessed politician who was determined to create a different kind of governance structure couldn't find a way to lead us into something different in the midst of all that absolute meltdown. It's not easy to do, and it takes a huge amount of energy and common cause and so on around you. And yet, in hindsight, it was a series of opportunities missed. And it's galling in the extreme to hear the authorities of the great and the good, the establishment, passing judgment on a Scottish government for not going its own way when they would be the same people, probably, that would vote for parties that would give pelters to anyone who deviated. And yet that's the problem, is that whilst we don't move the extra mile, we are doing such incredible damage to our own folk. And I mean, you see these kind of examples of, that's the most serious lack of courage you're ever going to get, I guess. And I almost don't even want to use that phrase because it's not quite right. It's not a thing about, just your personal callousness to be able to kind of run with something. And as you say, dear knows, nobody had been in that situation before. And she knew she would be risking dividing the country because they would automatically, half of the country, and slightly more at that point, would think she was just she was at it. So you could say there's another problem of having a country where people will make decisions about a third issue, a massive issue like public health, based on what they think about the union or independence. It's a tough blimmin' situation. There's no putting the genie back in the bottle for anyone who thinks we're having a wobble here. We've got to walk through to the other end of this and get out to independence, because this halfway house is dangerous. It's most obviously dangerous with COVID. But, when you look at even things today that are much less serious, that the decision to kind of, once again, kick the Heat in Buildings Bill into touch, which is, again, I haven't spent a long time looking at this, but dearie me. The Scottish government are saying that they can't guarantee it won't cost people a lot to switch to heat pumps in their homes. Really? Lordy. It was always, if you're going to rely on individual heat pumps, that, sorry, apologies coming in advance for anyone who just gets allergic to the word district heating. But, that was individual heat pumps were never the solution for nicely stacked, tenemental, flatted cities, all the rest of whom in Northern Europe rely on district blinking heating, which is produced centrally by any of councils, communities, large industrial units. This is so normal and such a done deal. Why the hell were we not putting that into the Heat in Buildings Bill, with only people in the country might accept? Because I'm sitting in it at the moment, that the gas guys have been looking at my gas boiler because there's nothing else here that will work till I switch to a heat pump or ground source or something. Sorry?
Oil.
No, it's gas.
Well, you're on the gas, right?
Yeah. I'm not on the gas mains. It's the worst of all.
It's a bomb in your back garden.
It's a bomb in my back garden because we're so in the middle of
Fraser
nowhere.
would always call it.
We're so in the middle of nowhere. We're not on the mains gas, which again is very expensive. And, I'm the first person to put the solar panels up here. I'll probably be the first one to move on to the heat pumps. And that very probably that will be it. And I'll spend any savings I've got on putting this house into a sort of green mode and then just hoping that nothing else happens for the rest of my life. But is that the best we can do? Because, the examples are all there from other countries, and nobody, when I was watching an interview with Mary McCallan on the TV yesterday, was it Reporting Scotland? Was it? It was just such a kind of, it was like nobody actually had thought through what the core problem of any of this is. It's such a kind of, people just going around in circles suggesting that the Greens have been pushing this and now they're not there. And, come on, everybody. We're going to have to do this, but there's no country that would put all the huge costs onto individual homeowners. And even if there's new grant support, which, Mary McCallan has announced for up to 7,500 quid for some homeowners. That's, that's fine. But if it goes into creating an individual heat pump solution, you're just handing the problem on for 20 years till it is knackered and it needs upgraded. The key thing is,
and you're in a UK energy system that you can't escape from. So if you're trying to tell everybody that they need to swap to an electricity-based heating source at a time when you can't actually do anything to modify the cost of domestic energy, you're kind of snickered.
That's totally it. Because, the guys who know about all of this stuff said that's the number one problem with all of this, whether it is the heat pumps or district heating systems, is that the cost of electricity is just utterly sky high and will remain so as long as we have got no control over it and no analysis of it. And no real, for all the talk of, different setups for Good Morning Scotland and whatever else. It takes expertise that I know I don't have, but it's such an important area. We both try to kind of dabble into it because it's critical to Scotland, but we need much more than just gumming the politicians around. There's got to be the heat networks, which is part of this draft bill. Okay, that has got to end up being some kind of way to reassure investors, because the money's all sitting there to put into district heating, as far as I understand, because it's a very safe sort of investment. So it literally needs some pump priming. It needs encouragement. It needs, we talked about pilotitis, but it needs very visible, big town changes now.
Yeah. I think you should just give us a quick update on the old Finland film before we sign off. And next week, when things become a bit clearer, we will have a good old go over the budget and also the terrible news about Mossmoran closing and the bun fight between the UK and Scottish government as to who gets to convene their roundtable discussion first. I see the UK government seems to have won out by gazumping the Scottish government and having theirs the day before, and then trying to run a political line calling for Kate Forbes to buckle under and come to their meeting instead of holding hers, which had been planned in advance. I thought it was quite interesting on Good Morning Scotland, as not called this morning. The union rep was talking about Grangemouth and all the announcements that had been made about Grangemouth, and the most recent one of this week of the extra money. It says we've not actually really seen anything happening yet, and they kept getting pushed, I think, to try and say something about the difference between the UK and the Scottish government, and eventually came out and said, well, actually the Scottish government's far more engaging with Keep Grangemouth working, unite the union, and with me individually as a rep than we've heard from the UK government, and we don't really get anything from them at all. So we'll see what happens with Mossmoran, but it's obviously a Labour controlled Fife Council, and Douglas Alexander have insisted that they get first crack of the round table. But this is...
I was going to say, does this actually really affect anybody? And yeah, I noticed that John Swinney won Politician of the Year in the Herald Awards, primarily for getting into the White House to talk about whiskey. Now, I may be getting that summary wrong, but I mean, really? I'm not to scoff at. I'm sure the whiskey guys will go, geez, that blooming matters to us. But, we just need so much more. And there's the problem again. If your peers rate you for simply being able to sort of, muscle into the White House and rub shoulders with Donald Trump, if that's the acme of success, who cares about heat and buildings bill? Who cares about, putting your energy into trying to get systems right in this country? Who cares about trying to get stuff into public management and ownership that's been privatised, since Thatcher? I mean, why would you bother when that's the sort of stuff that's eye-catching enough? I looked at the TV one night and everything was celebrity, celebrity, celebrity. It's like, this is a world of fluff. And if kind of political fluff gets you awards, then it's easy to see why you wouldn't bother going much further at it. But come on, as per the original observations about the way people are voting, people are not stupid. Actually, they may, just like the clickbait works up to a while, but actually when you realize that, you can't afford anything, that food inflation is higher now than ordinary inflation, when all these things are in your mind, that part of your mind that needs hope, and you don't hear politicians talking about it and really proper solutions, I mean, that is what's going to end up with this country hurtling off towards reform, albeit helped in the opposite direction by the chap from Wales who was caught lobbying for the Russians. And I mean, quite an extraordinary sentence.
10.5 years. I was like, wow, Lordy. That was really kind of. I mean, obviously, it was kind of corruption at the highest levels, and it completely failed to engage in any of the questioning and the police processes around it. But that was certainly one of these, that'll learn you, and this will send a signal to other people that this is the kind of thing we take seriously. But you were lamenting the crapness of programmed scheduled TV, which I think is certainly one of the reasons why long form and interesting stuff on YouTube does so well. And Scotland's Missing Forests has now got 150,000 views just in the last 2 weeks, which is quite incredible. So what news of Finland?
Yes, sorry. Well, we have now got practically the final version. We're sending it to all the people that were interviewed to make sure nobody's grumpy. It has to work because Gavin lives and works in Finland. It has to work for the Finns that he knows, so they don't go, "Oh God, you've just mispronounced that." And so there's a lot more reality checking. He has
to be able to go to the pub afterwards.
Yes, exactly.
Going, you talk such rubbish about it.
Yeah, you do that cliche thing again. We can't stand it. Albeit the Finns are really the last people. Well, perhaps when they get extremely drunk, they'd say that to you. So actually, very like Scots. But anyway, so it's going through that bit at the moment. I mean, hopefully it'll just be a week and a bit or something now. We're still having this discussion about whether to put it into cinemas and community centres first or just whack it online. Anybody who has got an opinion, just let us know. But I'll have to be trying to get it booked into places once I know we've got a final product. It's quite stressful trying to do stuff like this and collect it around the country, so I'm not running all over the place all the time when you also haven't got a final product yet. So but believe me, when it's there, you will know. And just when we're talking about the old long form thing in the way of Pat coming up with stuff that he watched that he thinks is fantastic, Down Cemetery Road on Apple. Wow.
Was that with Emma Thompson?
It's Emma Thompson and Ruth Wilson. But I mean, Emma Thompson is just fabulous. She's sort of world-weary, sharp, caring, kind of relaxed, tufty, and just brilliant, basically. And Ruth Wilson also absolutely brilliant. And there's men in it as well. But it's worth even just getting a subscription to Apple for a month and watching the hell out of it, because there's been about 4 episodes so far, so you'd probably swipe the lot of it. But really, it is absolutely fabulous.
Fabulous news. Well, good recommendation. And on that note, we will catch up with you at the proper time, we hope, of Tuesday next week. See everybody that comes along on St. Andrew's Day on Sunday. And take care, folks. We'll see you next week, chums.